Life of Tiberius Gracchus, Chapter 8. The poor, when they found themselves forced off the land, became more and more unwilling to volunteer for military service or even to raise a family. The result was a rapid decline of the class of free smallholders all over Italy, their place being taken by gangs of foreign slaves whom the rich employed to cultivate the estates from which they had driven off the free citizens. Scipio's friend Gaius Laelius attempted to reform this abuse, but when he found himself opposed by the property-owning class, he took fright at the conflict which this program seemed likely to arouse, and abandoned his efforts, as a result of which he was given the name of the wise or the prudent, for the Latin word sapiens seems to carry either meaning. Tiberius, on the other hand, went straight to the root of the matter as soon as he had been elected tribune. He was encouraged in his plans, as most writers report, by Diophanes the orator and Blosius the philosopher. Diophanes was an exile from Mytilene, but Blosius was a native Italian from Cumae, and had been a close friend of Antipater of Tarsus at Rome, who had paid him the honor of dedicating to him some of his philosophical writings. Some writers consider that Cornelia, Tiberius's mother, was at least partly to blame for Tiberius's death, since she often reproached her sons with the fact that Romans still referred to her as the mother-in-law of Scipio, but not yet as the mother of the Gracchi. Others maintain that Tiberius was also influenced by his jealousy of a certain Spurius Postumius. This man was of the same age as Tiberius, and a close rival as a public speaker. So when Tiberius returned from his campaign against Numantia, and found that his adversary had far outdistanced him in fame and influence, and had attracted general admiration, it seems likely that he resolved to outdo him by introducing a challenging political program, which would arouse great expectations among the people. However, his brother Gaius has written in a political pamphlet that while Tiberius was traveling through Etruria on his way to Numantia, he saw for himself how the country had been deserted by its native inhabitants, and how those who tilled the soil or tended the flocks were barbarian slaves introduced from abroad. And it was this experience which inspired the policy that later brought so many misfortunes upon the two brothers. But it was above all the people themselves who did most to arouse Tiberius's energy and ambitions by inscribing slogans and appeals on porticos, monuments, and the walls of houses, calling upon him to recover the public land for the poor. Chapter 9. He did not, however, draft this law by himself, but consulted a number of the most eminent and respected citizens, among them Crassus the Pontifex Maximus, Mucius or Mucius Scaevola the jurist, who was then consul, and Appius Claudius, who was Tiberius's own father-in-law. And certainly many will agree that no law directed against injustice and avarice was ever framed in milder or more conciliatory terms. For the men who deserved to be punished for breaking the law, and who should have been fined as well as obliged to surrender the land which they had been illegally enjoying, were merely required to give up their unjust acquisitions, for which they were compensated, and to allow the ownership to pass to those citizens who most needed the land. But even though this act of restitution showed such tenderness for the wrongdoers, the people were content to forget the past, so long as they could be assured of protection against injustice for the future. The wealthy classes and the landowners, on the other hand, were bitterly opposed to these proceedings. They hated the law out of sheer greed, and its originator out of personal resentment and petty party prejudice. And they did their utmost to turn the people against the reform by alleging that Tiberius's object in introducing a redistribution of land was really to undermine the foundations of the state and stir up a general revolution. However, these tactics achieved nothing. Tiberius was fighting for a measure which was honorable and just in itself, and he was able to summon up an eloquence which would have done credit to a far less worthy cause. The result was that whenever he mounted the rostra and pleaded the case of the poor, with the people crowding around him to listen, the effect of his words was overwhelming, and no other orator could stand against him. "The wild beasts that roam over Italy," he would tell his listeners, "have their dens and holes to lurk in, but the men who fight and die for our country enjoy the common air and light and nothing else. It is their lot to wander with their wives and children, houseless and homeless over the face of the earth. And when our generals appeal to their soldiers before a battle to defend their ancestors' tombs and their temples against the enemy, their words are a lie and a mockery, for not a man in their audience possesses a family altar. Not one of all those Romans owns an ancestral tomb. The truth is that they fight and die to protect the wealth and luxury of others. They are called the masters of the world, but they do not possess a single clod of earth which is truly their own."